Here we have our liquid penetrant bench. It's got basically 5 stations on it. So over on the left, it starts out with, this is our dye bath. I'm going to take the lid off for now, just put it here. The next spot we have is a wash tank. And for this store, this is a dwell rack. We store it over the wash tank. We need to move it over here. It's a spot where we can set our parts, and the tray directs dye back into the extra dye back into the tank. So into the dye tank. Here's our wash tank here. We have our developer is in this bin here, and this is a dry powder developer. I can pick it up. See it? It's easy to get into the air. You don't want to breathe a ton of it. It's not toxic, but it's not, you don't want to breathe a bunch of that dust. We have an oven right here. The oven is on or off. The controls down at the bottom. I'll start that in just a second. And then on the far right is an inspection hood that has a halogen light in it, or you can use the black light flashlights that we've got. So in order to turn this whole bench on, it gets power from this plug here. Put the plug in, turn it. That turns the outlet on. And it turns the oven on to warm up. The oven doesn't have a temperature control. We've got a little temp gauge right here. It's just a readout. You can control the temperature if it starts to get too hot. I kind of cracking it open a little bit. Then I'm going to turn the light on to start warming up as well. The last thing I'm going to do is turn on our water, our rinse water, to let it start warming up. It's over here on the wall. I'm warming it up. I open it fairly high flow, just the hot water, like in your shower, warm in the morning. And once that warms up, then we will kind of set it to a low flow for actually rinsing our part. So right now it's reading about just under 70 degrees. We want it somewhere around 100 degrees typically when washing. For the oven, we want it to get somewhere between about 150 and 200. We have an alert temp set on here at 165. Most of the time we don't need it much higher than that. So typically we keep it about 150, 160. And for everything else, the halogen bulb and the inspection hood does need to warm up before you use it. So that's why I've got that on. So with our part, we're going to take it, and you want to get the entire surface that you're going to be inspecting covered with dye. There's fluorescent dye in the tank right here. I'm just going to dip it in. Make sure every side gets covered. When I pick it up, I'll let it drip off a little bit. Any excess dye, we want to go back into that dye bath. And then this is the first dwell time that I was talking about. It needs to dwell now for anywhere from about 10 to 20 minutes. And so for this example right now, I'm not going to give it that full time. I'll let it sit here for a minute while I change gloves. But it'll need to sit for 10 to 20 minutes. You decide how long it'll be. Just make sure you record what that time is. So I'm just going to grab a different glove. So put the hand in it. So this would be our dwell time right here. It's got to sit here about 10 to 20 minutes. The water temperature is getting up to 100 degrees. So while I'm waiting a couple more minutes, I'm going to turn the water flow down quite a bit. And this is a lot easier oftentimes with 2 people. I want just a trickle of water. That's probably too low. I want a trickle of water coming out. So you don't want to use a ton of pressure. What's happening is the dye right now is being pulled into any cracks or discontinuities by capillary action. We want to rinse any excess dye off the surface. And then we're going to use the developer to pull that dye that was in the cracks back out in order to see where it was held on to by any kind of cracks or corrosion and things like that. So I turned my water down a little bit. It may even be a little bit high, and the temperature is still getting a little high. So I'm gonna bring my hot water down just a tad. Maybe just give it a little bit of cold water just to try to keep it from getting too warm. And this, like I said, this process can take a minute to get this thing dialed in. Usually, I recommend you get it dialed in, you get it going, get your temperature set roughly. and then just kind of let it run. We're running a very small amount of water, so you don't have to sit there and turn it on and off each time. So I've got it turned down. You can see I've got a fairly low flow going on. And it's reading right now about 105 degrees. And I'm going to go ahead and go to that. So we're going to pretend that this is sat here for, again, anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes. You want to record exactly what that was. For most of the things we're doing, 10 minutes is probably plenty. But now I would take my part that's been welling. I'm going to rinse it. And this is a water washable dye. So I'm just going to run it over the surface. I want to be careful not to spray directly at it like this, but rather more at an angle where it's going to rinse. And one of the things you can do while you're doing this is to kind of see how well you rinse it. You don't want to over rinse. You also don't want to under rinse, or overwash or underwash. And the way you would test this is one of the first experiments you're going to do is using something called the TAM panel that allows you to test your process. And it has a rough surface and a smooth surface. And if you do it correctly, the rough surface should hold on to a small amount of dye. The smooth surface should be totally clean of dye. So if I want to see what's going on, I can turn the overhead. I've got the overhead black lights on. And shut that off. You can hopefully see that the part still is glowing on the surface a little bit. I haven't washed the inside very well, so there's a lot of dye still hanging onto that inside surface. I'm mainly going to be looking at the outside surface, so I'm going to give it a little bit more wash. But again, the surface of this, the inner surface is fairly rough. As I wash it, see that excess dye kind of running away. Those of you that are in the room, you can actually see it going down the drain over to my right. But again, I'm going to focus on the exterior of my part. So this area right here, you want to make sure that we don't have a bunch of glowing in this area. Again, I'm mainly going to be worrying about the exterior of the part right now, so the fact that there is some more dye hanging on the inside, and as concerned, although you're going to be looking at all sides of the part. Go ahead and turn the light back on, please. So once we've rinsed our part, we want to let it kind of drip off as much as possible. You do want to kind of avoid, if there are areas of interest, if you have known areas that you're going to be looking for cracks or that kind of thing, try to avoid touching those areas because you will cause a false indication with fingerprints potentially. But I'm going to kind of get it to drip off as much as I can. And then for this process that we're doing in here, where we're using a dry powder, if we were to put the dry powder on right now, it would stick and cake on here because of the wet surface. So that's where we're going to go over to our oven. Now our oven's only up to about 122 degrees, so I've been given it a lot of time to warm up. But usually the oven's around 150. The specific temperature, again, you want to record, but for what we're doing, there's a pretty wide range where it'll be effective. Really, the biggest thing it's here for is to dry any water remaining on the surface. Okay. You want to put it in long enough to dry the water on the surface. However, you don't want to leave it in long enough that it actually can cook the dye. So we're going to put it in, and it typically takes 5 minutes or less. Put it right over the fan. There's a fan kind of in the front half. Close this, and now I'm going to let it dry. Now this, I do have to actually let it dry before I can proceed. Otherwise, again, I'll end up with developer that's caked on my part. So I'm going to go ahead and pause for a minute before we let it dry. So our part's been in the oven now. It really has been in that long, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and it's pretty much dry at this point. If I pull it out, look at it, touch the edge carefully. There really is no liquid water left on the surface. There is some on the interior. It hasn't fully dried on the inside. But again, I'm mainly worried about the outside for the demo, so I'm going to go ahead and just move on to the next step. So I'll turn the oven off so there's less noise here. But normally you can just leave that on the duration of while you're working in here. For the developer, I'm going to open the tub, and there's some paintbrushes in here. I can use to just kind of dust developer over. Now, dry powder developer like this its purpose is not to stick to the part. It'll leave a little bit of a film, And what it's doing is each particle has kind of a developer chemical around it. So as that as those particles move across the part, they're going to leave a very thin layer of that developer chemical behind. That's going to start to wick the dye, hopefully back out of any kind of cracks or discontinuities that we have. So you want to kind of dust it over there, kind of gently. You don't want a bunch of powder though stuck to it. That's why we ran the dryer. I might get a little bit along the edges of these dirty welds here. And so I can kind of brush those areas with my brush to kind of knock off any excess powder. So I was kind of tapping it a little bit too. So you want to kind of get that powder, any remaining powder off of the part, because again, it's leaving that developer chemical behind as it travels across. I'm being careful not to touch what I consider the areas of interest, which are the welds in this case. So I'm handling the part by the edge here. Just know that I am putting fingerprints on it, so those areas potentially would not be inspected. If you have to inspect the entire part and there's nowhere to grab it, you may have to perform the process holding it on one end, and then go back and perform the process again, holding it at the opposite end, if there's not somewhere that's less critical or not critical. So I have dusted my part with developer. Now it has to do its second dwell or developing time. And so again, you let the part sit, and for this, it also is approximately 10 to 20 minutes. You'll decide how long that is, and you'll make sure to record that in your report. But for the interest of a demo, I'm going to go ahead and move on. And the next step, after you've given it that 10 to 20 minutes of developing, is to do your inspection. For this, you can use the hood that's back here, or you can use a black light. The important key, though, is that we can't have the white lights on. So go ahead and hit the white lights. I'm going to use the flashlight just so I can bring it up here. It's easier to see. And we did the LPI demo on this one. And so we knew there was a crack down one of the welds. And you can even see it right now under just the black light. You don't even need this flashlight because it is such a large crack. And that's where you can see it's a big crack, so it really didn't need to dwell that long for that dye to get pulled into there. So we can see a hard, definite line running down that weld in the center there. There's a few others on other sides, little pock marks that have stuff in them. And this is a very rough part reduced, so there is a lot of non-relevant indication where it's stuck to the surface. I didn't do an extremely thorough job of it. I've been kind of going through the process quickly as well. So there is some process error involved in it, just because of the nature of the demo. But the most obvious crack and things you're looking for are those more definite lines like you can see right here along this weld that we saw before when we did this as part of magnetic particle inspection. When you're all done, you need to clean the part. I have bottles of isopropyl alcohol, 99% isopropyl alcohol. This works just fine for cleaning it. You can also use the spot check cleaner. Go ahead and turn the lights on for me. You can use the spot check cleaner here as well. That's part of the aerosol cans. However, I prefer you use the alcohol just for general cleaning because it is much less expensive. And so we'll go ahead and I'll clean this off, and then we'll get ready to inspect our next item. So that is using the bench. What we're doing here, this is type 1, okay, which is fluorescent penetrant with a dry powder developer liquid wash or water wash.